Promise as strong as a spell. I'll never tell.
Hi guys, welcome back to exmolex. As you can see, I'm joined by my husband Brendan today.
Howdy there.
So today we are going to talk about the Duggar documentary, Shiny Happy People.
Ooh, cringe.
We watched it, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and as we were watching it, I kept having thoughts like, oh my gosh, the similarities to Mormonism are wild. And the thing that's funny is when I was a Mormon, I had watched a little bit of the show here and there, but my next door neighbors who had 8 kids loved the show. And I remember them talking a lot about the Duggars and idolizing their family as like something that you should reach for. But like looking back on it and thinking how weird it is like to idolize a family that has so many deep issues and were obviously embroiled in a cult.
Yeah, that didn't age well.
So anyway, we just kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that we noticed in the show, some of the things that were similar to Mormonism, and yeah, talk about our thoughts on the matter as people who were also in a cult. Okay, so the Duggars are a part of a group called the Institute of Basic Life Principles, or the IBLP, and that was split up into like a lot of different little subgroups and like other organizations, and they all had like an acronym, and just that reminded me of the church. The LDS church has so many acronyms. When they were talking about the IBLP in the documentary, they would talk about like different words that seemed kind of exclusive to them, and I felt like that had some similarities to Mormonism as well, because we had a lot of like code words that set us apart.
Yeah. Even like Stake Center is like weird
things that like
people.
Yeah, for us were like part of our normal average everyday language that other people wouldn't understand. Like all of the different organization, like there's the organization, the LDS church, right? But then they have like all these little subcategories, like your stake, your ward, your relief society, your elders quorum, your young women, your bishopric, your the primary, the nursery, the high council. And then within the young women, like the beehives, the Maya maids, the laurels, they had like there's just
priests,
like all
teachers,
these little
deacons, elders.
Yeah, there's like a million little like subcategories within that like nobody would really understand the language or know what it is.
Which is funny because you look back on it now and it's like it really is micromanaged like crazy.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was really similar to Mormonism was just the fact that there were so many like things that the IBLP seeped into. So it wasn't just a religion, it was your politics, it was your lifestyle, it was the way that you conducted yourself, it was your religion, but it also just like everything else. So like
the way you dress,
right,
literally everything.
Discouraging people from having beards, which is something that Mormonism has done. The way you dress, they would have like lessons on how women had what did they call it, eye traps, if you were being too immodest, and they would have like
eye traps.
Yeah, but it was more, it was like Mormonism on steroids, a lot of it. Or like Mormonism was like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Like it just very, very intense. Like anything could be considered immodest, even if it's just like a little bit of collarbone showing too much, which like Mormonism has very much been that way in the past, and they've kind of tried to back off on it a bit. But a lot of the stuff they were saying, I'm like, yeah, that's similar to what Mormon leaders were saying in like the 40s, 50s. I feel like if you did a documentary on Mormonism the same way, and you went back and found old clips of General Conference and stuff from several decades ago, the content would be very similar. Yeah. It wouldn't be all that different. The modesty and the purity culture, I feel like, is what played so largely into Josh Duggar and people like him that end up being extremely sexually repressed.
Yep.
To a point where it becomes like an addiction for them. You could see that with, you know, Josh ending up being inappropriate. I'm trying to like use YouTube safe words here. But being inappropriate with his sisters and eventually being arrested for
possessing bad pictures.
Yeah.
Which seems like, I mean, this is like such a common theme anymore.
It is.
Like this religion, the IBLP, Mormonism, Catholicism, you name it. It seems like it's just popping up everywhere in every religion, because these types of organizations set up like this perfect storm of like ways to work the system so that they can make it so they're alone with people's kids and stuff.
It's honestly, I mean, if you look into it, it's like where the highest rate of child predators is within religious organizations, and typically
in the Bible Belt. Somebody just sent me like a map about that the other day, and it was like the Bible Belt is like top for like all these like horrible statistics.
Yeah, it's like you said, like it's a place where people who are trying to target children for these types of crimes,
or women, or really anybody, that it sets up a perfect place for abusers.
Yeah, so that's why it becomes so common.
There are people I know personally that are not okay with like sex education in a lot of forms, and that is another huge part of the problem, is when you don't educate children and minors about safe sex or just consent or all those things, then it sets them up to be in a position where if something happens to them, they're immediately going to feel like shame, guilt, and even feel like the person is going to harm or hurt them in some way if they do tell somebody.
Yeah. Speaking of like having no sex education, that was part of, like, they talked about, you know, Jim Bob, the dad, when his son is going to be married, his oldest son,
like
Josh,
the day before
he has the talk with him,
gives him the rundown in like a couple minutes.
So awkward. And I think he had like a CD or a DVD or something with like instructions.
And the sick thing is that Josh at that point he'd already been
messing
doing
around
what he was
with
doing.
His sisters. You know, I've talked about Mormonism and sexual repression with cults to consciousness. We've talked about it before in this channel, but I feel like that repression often leads to problems with the way that you think about and view sex.
Yep.
And that obviously was a huge problem with Josh, and I'm sure with lots of other members of cults like this. Well, they talked about how Bill Gothard had been caught doing the same types of things that Josh is doing. So it really is just rampant, the sexual abuse, and it comes a lot, I think, from the repression. They
even showed, if you haven't seen the documentary, you'll have to watch it, but there was, like a part that I almost couldn't sit through, where they had the guy on stage that was like demonstrating how to reprimand a child, and it was sickening how like obvious it was that person was a predator.
That was another thing. Part of the whole IBLP thing was like teaching how to discipline your child in a way that you're not going to get in trouble, basically. And it was so disgusting. They talked about like how to spank your kid so that it doesn't leave marks, so that you can't get in trouble for it. How to punish a baby. They talked about blanket training, where they'd have a little baby like 6 months old on a blanket and put something off of the blanket, and basically in order to torture them, the child to obey their parent with no question, every time the baby tried to get the toy, they would hit them until the baby stopped trying to get the toy and stopped crying.
Yeah. Which would take hours and hours and hours, and
oh my
it's
gosh,
just deplorable.
That was so hard to watch. Oh, another thing that was similar with Mormonism was they talked about the umbrella of authority. And I heard this in church. I heard this talked about. I was going to try to look for it on the church's website, because I was like, I feel like it's got to be somewhere in like a Sunday school manual or something somewhere. But I'll put a picture of it up on the screen if you haven't seen this before. Tell me if you were a part of the Mormon church, or even part of any other religion, if you saw this diagram or were taught this lesson. I don't think I heard it with that terminology, but I definitely saw like, the image, and I was taught the lesson of like Christ above the husband, above the wife. Another thing in the documentary that like kind of blew my mind, that I haven't really seen that much in Mormonism, at least modern day, was that they would have the older kids in the Duggar family take care of the babies. So the mom was just continually having children, right? And as soon as a baby was weaned, she would give it to an older child for them to raise.
Yeah.
So she could have another baby.
Nuts.
And I just was like shocked by that, because like they would have kids that were like 12, 13 years old, and their full-time job was taking care of a toddler.
Basically got babies taking care of babies.
Yeah. And like, how are you supposed to enjoy your own childhood and, do your own thing at all, have any privacy? One
of the daughters had talked about that like from such an early age, like she, That was all she did, and so her childhood was just basically taken from her.
Yeah, I've known a few Mormon families that had a lot of kids and that kind of did similar things. Not to that extent, because the Duggars had like 19 or 20 kids or something. But, you know, I saw it happen a little bit, and I kind of wonder, you know, again, there's so many similarities with Mormonism, and Mormonism used to be known, and probably, you know, kind of is still known for having a ton of kids.
How many kids you have and how many wives you have.
Yeah. And I wonder if that was kind of common practice to take care of that many children as well. I mean, back when the church still did the polygamy thing, I know that like there were so many women, they would all take care of the kids, but I wonder if once there were a ton of kids involved, if they kind of started doing that same thing where they'd have the kids taking care of the kids, so that, because I mean, there's only so much that you can do as a parent to take care of that many kids. You know what I mean? Without them losing out on
your attention.
Yeah, like I even sometimes we have 4 kids, and I'm like, it's hard sometimes to divide your attention between that many children individually. I just can't imagine. And it was only the girls that they had taking care of the babies, mind you.
You can't even have normal hobbies.
Oh, right, because they didn't even let them like watch TV.
Oh, you can't watch regular TV. You can't like.
And
I play video games, I listen to music. They don't have all these things. You're restricted to basically church study and like work.
There was like a bunch of stuff that they had a problem with television and stuff. So the one thing that I thought was super weird was that Bill Gothard claimed that the founder of Cabbage Patch Kids is a warlock. They basically told him to like not have anything to do with pop culture, which was so funny because the Duggars were such a huge part of pop culture.
Yeah.
But like they weren't allowed to watch TV themselves. Pop music was a no. Pokemon, Disney were all things that were basically like no, like you can't have anything to do with this. Mormonism also has historically had really strict standards for entertainment. We've talked about before how like they didn't want members playing card games.
So dumb.
Because it was too similar to gambling. And they've been very, very strict about entertainment and media. And again, this is something that like in more recent years they've backed off on. And if you ask like Gen Z Mormons, they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But the church really in like the 80s and 90s cracked down on entertainment and media. It was like every single general conference there was a talk about how you need to be like watching only the most clean and pure and listening to only clean and pure things.
We were to the point where we had bought like a ClearPlay DVD.
Oh my god, the ClearPlay
DVD player, and we were editing.
VidAngel.
Yes, we had VidAngel. We were editing swear words out of music. Like, there's a reason we were doing all that, and it wasn't just because we felt like it.
No, we were just trying to like follow Mormonism to a T.
Yep.
We were being like super orthodox. And it's funny because people, like I've gotten comments from Mormons that'll be like, well, it sounds like your parents were just really strict. And I'm like, well, my parents didn't pull the rules out of their ass. Like,
came from the church.
That was straight from the church. And they were trying to follow.
You all just weren't following it.
We were trying to follow, yeah. But yeah, that was something that I thought was very similar. I mean, Mormonism typically doesn't go as far as like calling out specific things to have beef with.
Usually not.
I feel like
they leave that up to the individual family.
Yeah, so they won't be like, you're not allowed to watch any Disney movies. Like they wouldn't typically do something like that. But they do have really strict guidelines. And as a Mormon growing up, I knew other Mormon kids that were not allowed to read Harry Potter.
Yep.
Because
we weren't allowed to watch Rugrats.
The Rugrats?
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to watch The Simpsons. Unless my mom was not home. My dad would let us watch The Simpsons.
Yeah, my dad was a little more lax with some of the stuff that we could watch, but...
Okay, one other thing, I think we've been talking for probably long enough, but one other thing that I really wanted to talk about was the fact that the IBLP was on purpose trying to raise up as many children as possible.
Oh my god, yeah.
So that they could go into politics and spread their politics.
Literally said they were raising an army.
Yeah. And they were trying to spread their religion by getting into politics. So they were raising little conservative Christian politicians basically to take over the government.
Yes. Which is insane.
It was insane. And it was crazy seeing like you know, when they actually showed the footage of these people and the type of people that they were raising up to put in it, like, so blatant too. Like, it wasn't a secret. It's like, this is their purpose, this is their goal, this is their mission. And Mormonism, I mean, when they talk about having a lot of children, a lot of the reasoning why would be the same. Like, I think it was Spencer W. Kimball talked about it a lot, Ezra Taft Benson talked about having a lot of children, and a lot of it was to populate God's earth. That's pretty common within a lot of, like, Christian religions and other religions, is to have a lot of children.
Yeah.
And to raise them up in the religion. They also talked about, like, people who are conservative Christians who make content like I do on this channel or on TikTok or on, you know, any of the other platforms that I'm on. And they actually had Paul and Morgan, if you've ever heard of them. I have never, like, gone to their channel specifically, but when I was more into, like, watching more content, I watched Jimmy Snow. He had a bunch of stuff with Paul and Morgan. And so I had seen some things about them, and I thought it was really interesting that they had them on the documentary, but then they were on it for like 3 minutes. And I thought it was funny because I wondered, like, how they felt about that once they saw it. Yeah, because it was like,
it's kind of just a small highlight of, like, look how, this is some crazy stuff they're
like,
saying.
I was like, oh, like, ouch. I wonder if they saw the documentary and were like, oh my gosh, you know, they interviewed us for, like, such and such amount of time and they only put in, like, a 2-minute clip.
I hope that they watched it and were enlightened.
I doubt it, to be honest, but
I doubt it too.
I thought it was interesting them highlighting that, you know, there's a whole bunch of, like, Christian TikTokers and influencers and stuff now. But it's funny because, like, I don't see any of that because, you know, obviously that's not going to be on my FYP.
No, I don't usually see it, and if something like that does come up, it's an immediate nope.
But they also, in addition to that, had a bunch of people from the other side, people who were ex-cults or who were just interested in cults on the documentary, and they interviewed them. They had much larger sections of the documentary than Paul and Morgan did.
Yeah.
But I was like, hey, like, that's my crowd, like the ex-cult people.
Yeah. And a lot of stuff they were saying sounded pretty similar.
A lot of it did. Anyway, like, all in all, if you're interested in learning about cults, if you were ever a part of a cult, if you might currently be a part of a cult, I highly recommend checking out Shiny Happy People. I thought it was great. Every time I watch a cult documentary, I'm like, there's gonna be similarities.
Yeah.
Because I've you know, it's not my first rodeo. We've been through this enough times now. Like, we've seen it. Mormonism is a cult. And when you, I don't know, like, we have watched so many cult documentaries, and, like, so many of them are so similar. And I wasn't sure, like, how many there would be with this one, because I didn't know much about the IBLP before we watched it.
Wow.
But there were a lot.
So many.
And it's always, like, really, like, it's so weird being on the outside of a cult and being raised in one, and now looking back and being like, oh my gosh, I was actually in a cult, and then comparing it to other ones and being like, no, but really, like, I actually was in a cult. That's wild.
A pretty extreme one.
Yeah. There was another documentary we watched a few months ago. What was that one called? The one that was, like, in New Zealand.
Oh, God, don't get me started.
Steady stand true.
I forget the name of the show, but yeah, they had these names like Steady Stand True and
oh, it was Gloria Vale.
But then they're
Fervent Steadfast.
They were in Australia, right?
I think it was New Zealand.
New Zealand. But so they have that New Zealand accent, and it killed me every time. Steady Stand True or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't do it, but
yeah, there were a whole bunch of them. Anyway, that is also a really excellent cult documentary.
Super cringy stuff going on there too.
If you guys want us to do, like, a review of that one as well, we could totally do it.
Yeah.
I would just need to, like, maybe watch parts of it again to remember all of it.
That we'll have to look up a big list of all the really creative names.
Really creative.
They've named their children.
Steady Stand True. It's like a running joke in our house at this point.
It is. It's so bad.
Highly recommend you go give Shiny Happy People a watch. Let us know if you want to hear us do any other review of any other like cult documentaries. We could do Gloria Vale if you guys want to hear more about that one.
Yep, leave it in the comments.
There's so many that we've watched. I feel like we should do more reviews about this stuff. Let us know if you like this kind of video. We also did a review of Under the Banner of Heaven, so if you didn't catch that one, check it out because one of my favorite shows.
Really good.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching, and special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. You guys are the best. Extra special thank you to Amy, Craig Call, Doug Davis, and Tans for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. If you guys would like to support the channel, there are links to do so in the description below, as well as links to all my other social media if you want to see more content. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
You're keeping these promises strong as a spell. I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure. Never have to close the door. Been